We think it was telling that Angela Merkel in 2010 in the MDO said, the immigration policies of Germany have failed. Integration is a failure in that state. And we should think to a large extent the reason this failure has occurred is because these states have failed to be selective enough. So what are we proposing in today's debate? We're putting this debate in the context of Western liberal democracies. And let's talk about the status quo right now. Currently, when you choose to immigrate, or when someone's emigrating to a new nation, they go to the local embassy and they have to answer, they either fill in questionnaires or they have to answer questions. And a lot of these questions or criteria have to do with the individual's ability to sustain themselves and contribute to the state. So they answer questions like, do you have qualifications and are you going to be able to employ yourself? Do you have academic qualifications? Do you have some sort of debilitating disease that will make you a burden on the health or social services that that state provides? Do you have relatives or friends or a family? So the questions that we ask now are not necessarily in relation to the values of the state or the values of that culture, but more so an ability of yourself to sustain yourself within that state and to continue to contribute to that. We say retain this. But in addition to that, we're going to adopt some of the standards that are used to determine and allow people to be citizens of the state in the same test that allow you to immigrate to that state. So fundamentally, what we're talking about in this case is firstly, on this value, we're talking about firstly the idea of a pledge to subscribe to the values of a constitution of the state. So these are things like secularism, the freedom of expression, and equality, including equality between genders and races. We're talking about also the capability to converse in the national language, to be able to carry on a conversation, as well as a displaying an understanding of cultural norms. Now, we're not saying you have to like burgers if you go to America, but we're saying you should understand, or if you're Bulgarian, where this means no, you should understand in America, nodding means yes. So fundamentally, we say that. And we also think you need to have things like recognizing the rights of women. So, to some extent there's a question of verification. And we say we can use the same standards of verification that we do for citizenship tests. We do it all the time. Now, we recognize that there's some subjectivity here, and every country has its own values. And we're more than happy to adopt, to some extent, universal values between states. So maybe states like Germany might have a different set of values, but we think the criteria we've outlined earlier has enough commonality there. Now, when we say immigration here, we're talking about long-term stays. So it's not about going to ski in the Alps. It's about permanent residence or getting a job, getting a job license or job visa in that country. And we're excluding from this criteria asylum seekers and refugees. So if because you're escaping persecution or you're threatened by death by staying in your own country, we say, of course, you're allowed in under the conventions of refugees. Fundamentally, this is about economic migrants, people seeking to build a new life in a new country, seeking to get a job there and seeking to live there. Sit down, ma'am, not yet. So fundamentally, we say, we're not stopping anyone from also practicing their current cultures, but we say those have to be calibrated. So you can be a Muslim, but you have to be a Muslim in the sense that it's calibrated to the sensibilities and norms of the state you're in. And we're by no means removing any protections of the law to discrimination against these individuals or harm. So hate speech, discrimination laws and hate crimes still apply in any of these states. So we're not advocating for xenophobia here. Now, our stance in today's debate is states have a right and responsibility to demand that their immigrants integrate smoothly. I'm going to talk about it from the level of these states. On the first level, I'm going to talk to you about how it prevents the formation of enclaves. Secondly, this idea of a duty to the citizens of that state, and under that purview of that duty, firstly security, and also a clash against accepted values. NC is going to come and talk to you about things from the perspective of the immigrants and how this makes their lives and their integration into those states easier. Yes, Ika.
Sir, can you give us a clarification? What kind of cultures exactly are incompatible with cultures in the West? Who are you talking about?
We think fundamentally if you come to a country and you're forcing a woman to wear a burqa, Mr. Speaker, that's incompatible. We think if you come to a country and you say the primary leadership of a state should be an ayatollah, that's culturally incompatible. We say fundamentally if you can't speak the language and communicate with the people who you'll be interacting with on a day-to-day basis, that's culturally incompatible. Funnily enough, I said this all in my model, Chika. Now, we take the first thing, right, the idea of enclave. We say what fundamentally happens now with immigration in these cases is the formation of ghettos. people come to these countries and push and pull factors cause them to form enclaves. How does this happen? Firstly, we say the pull factors is, you come to an alien country, an alien land, you look for people who have commonality with you. So you form, you gravitate to the people who you can speak the same language with, who you identify with the common norms, who have the familiarity, who provide you the familiarity with the things you had back home. And we say, what happens in this case is people group together in clusters. And you see these in cities like London, the Algerian ghettos in Paris, Turkish and Middle Eastern ghettos in a lot of the European cities that you see now, or the Mexican ghettos that you see across American cities. And fundamentally we say they group together because they share commonality. Then there's a push also. They find it difficult to interact with each other. What happens when you form these enclaves? We say, fundamentally, if immigration is allowed unchecked under what the status quo is, these enclaves get larger and larger. Firstly, that removes the impetus on any level to start adopting the cultural norms, because you have microcosms of the countries of origin forming in those states. But on a second level, say the long-term effect is, many a times these communities start to have further generations, and these generations do not adopt the values of the new nation or the host nation, but they continue to retain the values of the origin nation. And remember, in most countries, because they practice jus soli, they are able now to vote in elections and influence political discourse. Secondly, we say, there's a responsibility to citizens, fundamentally because they have, the responsibility to citizens, because they have greater responsibilities conversely to the state. A citizen can be forced to serve in the army during a draft. And therefore we say there's responsibility firstly to security. Firstly, security in the sense that in these communities, because there is general inability to converse or engage in dialogue, what happens is misunderstandings flare very quickly into violence. And we saw this in the case of the Algerian riots in Paris and the responses to the Gigan's protest. Secondly, we say though, this plays right into the hands of ultra-nationalist groups. Finally, we say, in terms of clash of values, these individuals can influence the political discourse. Firstly, how I pointed out, they eventually are able to vote through their children becoming citizens. But secondly, in many places, in municipal elections, these individuals can participate in these elections, and these communities can participate. Also, they can contribute to finance. And this results in leaders exploiting these communities or playing up to their fears. In the case of what you saw happening in the push for Sharia law that you're seeing in Britain now, or the anti-defamation of religion laws that you're seeing put in place in many European countries. So fundamentally we say, open your doors, but choose who comes in. We say, adopting the state values is necessary for the protection of the state and also for the protection of these individuals who come in. We're proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for starting today's debate. Now I invite the Leader of Opposition, Shibina Permanent, to continue the case on side opposition.
We think that this debate is about the vast majority of cases where immigrants who undertake the risks, the harms, and all of the sacrifices you have to make in order to leave your homeland. These immigrants are the people who chances are willing to integrate and are willing to adapt things like not doing things that are illegal, such as forcing their daughters into marriages they don't want to be in because they honestly think it is going to better their lives to live in the United States, the United Kingdom, or Germany. What Tate essentially proposed to you is an extremely soft policy, which is really just an extension of status quo. When he tells you want to measure things like whether they're going to force their daughters to wear burqas, we think it's illegal to force your child to wear something she doesn't want to wear. If you strongly pressure her to, it's not something the state recommends, but it's something that's legal. And the way a democracy works is that it never imposes on people what it wants people to do. No thank you. So long as there is no direct and tangible harm. We think the state can start eroding, how strongly it holds its laws and how strongly it upholds people's rights. you have to look at how citizenship and how immigration in general works. It's not a matter if you get to Germany just because you filled out a form and a week later you're there with your entire family and 2 months later you're a German citizen. That isn't how it works. It takes decades for these individuals to get their petitions granted, to get their visas approved, and things like that. Often there is a work period before they can even get green cards or residency statuses. And after even more years, that and only then are they able to get citizenship. So we think in the decades or maybe even years before a family or a group of individuals are able to get citizenship, you've already proven their ability to integrate and their ability, no thank you, to adapt. Please sit down, sir. Proven their ability to adapt. Because if in the process of those several years they've done something wrong, like killed their daughter because she wanted to date a white man, we think that person will actually be denied citizenship.
But fundamentally, if you're saying they've adopted to all these standards, we're more than happy to let them in. But if they do not speak the language, if they do not subscribe to the values, will you let them in?
Speaking the language is necessary. In status quo, there are language exams. I'm not sure if you know how citizenship is granted. You're required to know the pledge, no thank you. You're required to know the Pledge of Allegiance. You're required to know the national anthem. You are required to know about American history. How is your policy, no thank you, going to be operationalized and interpreted on the ground? You are going to be making prejudgments. And even if the Arab man answers that he isn't going to force his daughter into a marriage, you are going to assume that because that is the culture in that country, that particular man is likely to do that. We think in principle, the state cannot legislate and institutionalize in favor of cultural generalizations and cultural discrimination. And pragmatically, no thank you, we think it leads to much more harms than the so-called benefits of integration that they actually want to achieve. Let's talk about the first idea. No thank you. Why what they're doing really is institutionalizing discrimination, generalization, and why that is not legitimate as far as a liberal democracy or any state is concerned really. Because the culture of your country, the culture of Germany, the United States, is essentially one of tolerance and acceptance. That means for as long as you don't do anything illegal, you should be able to be fine in that particular country. When the state comes up with this notion, no thank you, of cultural compatibility, of saying that because you think nothing is, saying no, you are a bad person and are unable to integrate, you impose a hierarchy of cultures. And we think that is something that is inherently problematic because the state, the democracy, should never assume that the person is determined by the culture of his or her birth. Because that assumes, one, that you adopt a culture wholesale, or that you don't change that particular appropriation, no thank you, of that culture over time, or that you even appropriated the culture of the country of your birth. How many, liberal Malaysians do we know who were born in Malaysia? Tate and Logan happily raising their hands. No thank you. But under their model, the state is going to make a judgment of them. Indian men from Malaysia, not very culturally compatible with the United States, even if they're probably more liberal, no thank you, than most American men to begin with. We think that kind of generalization is inherently undemocratic. The assumption here is if you have different cultures and if you have different ways of thinking, you cannot integrate and you can't tolerate each other. We think that isn't true. You don't need to be American. You don't need to be a white girl in order to get along with a white girl. We think the conservative Chinese girl can get along with the white girl and remain conservative. Because it's really just about respecting each other's cultures and, agreeing that you guys have different ways of doing things. That's what a democracy and that's what a pluralistic society really is about. Tangibly, what is the harm of what they're doing? The harm is that you send a message to your own domestic population that there's a hierarchy of cultures, that there is a preferable way of doing things. In a nation, no thank you, in nations that are built on immigration, where you don't have one culture, we think the message that you send when you say that one culture is better than another or more functional for your state, that's an awful message to send to your people. Because once you say that a Middle Eastern man, no thank you, is less culturally compatible with the United States, you are inherently discriminating against your own citizens who are of Arab origin. But even when there isn't a one-to-one correspondence between cultures that are discriminated against, you still forward the idea that one culture is more American in another. And we think that's dangerous. Pragmatically, let's look at why their policy really isn't necessary to begin with. We think immigration has a self-correcting mechanism. Most people don't want to, the people who do want to migrate and who go through all of these harms, and it's a massively long process, are the people who are, decided for themselves that they're okay with living there. Why would they migrate otherwise if, they think it's such an awful culture and they're not willing to at least respect it and deal with it? We think that's something quite clear. In fact, if you look at the history of immigrants in the United States, you'll see that, they're often the most eager ones to, make sure that they have completely clean track records. The top-notchers of your SATs, the top-notchers of your colleges are usually the children of the Chinese and Indian immigrants, because they know how difficult it was for their parents to get citizenship. We think Silicon Valley, we think, Chinatown in the United States. All of these things are testaments of the ability of different cultures to actually integrate without, having to appropriate a new culture entirely. Thank you.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for opening the case inside government. I now invite the Deputy Prime Minister, Nam Choon Kim, to continue the case on side government.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I think today's opposition they just ignore and ignore and ignore. We never say all the people from the other countries will be rejected by our tax, right? They clearly say that someone who can speak languages or they have a different values against women and religions, they might not be able to come to our countries because that makes more conflict in our society. Because there are a lot of people, I don't think they are nice people, they cannot be, because women cannot debate in front of the public. That is the people we talk about in today's debate. I'm not saying I am, but there's a lot of people, and these people cannot pass our test, and these people are problems. With that, I have one argument. I'm going to talk about why our policy is going to benefit to the people who immigrate in our society. I'm going to give you two levels, right? First, who cannot pass the test, and B, who can pass the test and who can be in our society. And before moving on to my first argument, I'm going to deal with some of the liberals from the government here. They just say because they are so hard to come to our country, they will willingly come to our country, all the people can integrate our society without any link, right? Tate clearly said, if you cannot speak the languages, and if you have a total different values and norms and the ideas against women, it's really hard to integrate to the society. This is the people who you want to talk about in today's debate. Second, these guys talk about forcing burqa is the illegal, right? No. If women say, I don't want to wear burqa, then father say, you must wear burqa, that is the problem. They just misunderstand the burqa problem, right? And they say, the immigration and citizen is same. No, this is different. Immigration is, if you stay some years in our countries, you can stay. But we want to extend the tax the citizen must pay, that we want to extend that tax to the immigration. You must listen more, don't ignore, right? Then they say culture is acceptance and tolerance. But states always, using their power and authority, bring the greater good to the citizens in our country. Like limiting the other countries' citizens' rights. Like the French banning burqa in their countries. I think this is exactly the same in terms of the ideas. Then they talk about we generalize the people. No, we never generalize the people. These guys generalize the people, right? Because when people come to our countries, they just bring them making a ghetto without refusing to integrate with other society. That looks like making a generalization they want to create. Yes.
Sir, why is it you assume we're okay with letting people who want to do illegal things into the country, like people who insist to wear burqas, in a place where the burqa is banned?
Can you pray? Wait, I don't understand. My first argument. Firstly, people who cannot pass the test, right? Okay, when these guys really come to our countries, they have asymmetrical information, right? Because A, they cannot speak our languages, because most of the countries, when they promote their countries, their name is English, but these people can. So they cannot get enough information. B, there is not enough organization and friends which can inform these people. You need languages, or these countries, when you go to that country, you might drop all your lives and lives and social norms if you want to integrate to the society. This asymmetrical information is problem. Why this is the problem, Mr. Speaker? Like I said, they can speak language. B, they cannot openly getting criticized of their religions, right? C, they always see women don't have the same right as a man. But these are the problems. Why? A, if you can speak languages, you cannot be hired in nice company, right? You might be working in the labor war. B, if you cannot accept the clear and open criticisms, when you go to a company in the countries like US and Sweden, in other countries, they're always having an open debate about religion. These people cannot tolerate this kind of situation. See, when they must work under the human boss, they cannot work because their norms and everything said you cannot work under the woman because they cannot deserve at the first place. And at the end of the day, they just will and fall into the labor work, which doesn't need any interaction with other peoples. And why this is a problem? Furthermore, if you be in these countries, you always have resentment and feeling isolated from the society. Because if you go to society, when you see always women driving a car, when you see the newspaper in the Sweden, in the cartoon, they criticize the Muslim religious, they will feel resentment and they will feel really pissed off. These kind of things make isolated these people from the society. Then most likely these people might be slightly more cost or same labor work, right? Why this is a particular problem in the country like this? Because if you are in these countries, A, like I said, they will have a resentment, and B, they don't have any community and friends they can share their information. They cannot release their belief and live. I think this is the problem. And when you come to my countries, it's really hard to go back to your countries. Why? There are several reasons. First, you don't have money to go back to your countries, right? Because your job is just sustain your life. B, you just still stuck in these countries because you will be shamed because when you leave the country, you say, I'll be rich. But at the end of the day, you just come back because it is really shame you cannot come back to your society. See, when you start to settle down, if you have a children, it's really hard to come back to the society. So if you compare people living in our society, people living in their own society, I think people who not come to my country is better than who living in this society. Then moving on to the people who can pass the test, right? In these countries, we have some kind of misconceptions and these kind of feelings against immigration. Why? The people, when they see the ghettos, when they refuse to integrate with society, they have bad conception. These people cannot integrate to the society. These people cannot function in the society. These kind of conception can be removed. Why? State clearly give you some kind of test, right? If the people can pass this test, these people can be integrated and function as your individual members. At the end of the day, these kind of things can give you and clearly remove the generalization they talk about can bring in our marriage. For those reasons, I'm very proud to propose this.
We
extremely sorry about the technical difficulties. I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. And now, I'd like to call upon the government whip, Ses Gotakmo, to continue the case inside opposition. Sorry, Deputy Opposition, Jika Mangahas, to continue the case on side opposition.
Mr. Chair, when Angela Merkel said that immigration failed in Germany, the mic works. Can I start again? I'm going to say the same thing anyway. Okay. Mr. Chair, when Angela Merkel said that immigration failed in Germany, she wasn't arguing against accepting more Turks into her country because there are parts of their culture that are inherently incompatible. Probably because she also knew that saying so would cause an uproar of massive proportions in a country that is still compensating for other cultural discrimination like the Holocaust. That's why we don't believe that the response of government side is in any way targeted to what the natural problems of immigration pose as a solution that is somehow made to make things better. It isn't. Let's go to some rebuttal before I go on to my argumentation in today's debate. The first thing is the idea that if immigration fails, therefore we should stop immigration. That's more or less the boiled down statement that Tate kept supporting. The Tate was backing up for you earlier today. Immigration has failed because people can't integrate. Therefore we will never accept more people who will be able to integrate. Do you realize that integration presumes immigration in the first place? You cannot integrate people unless they immigrate into your country. So how do you expect them to ever be able to immigrate and integrate? How do you expect news cultures to ever be able to pass your borders? How do you expect different people of different, slightly less white cultures to be able to tick off the boxes on your little form that makes them culturally acceptable until maybe 20 or 30 years after the Malaysians have gotten in, maybe some Filipinos, but there are too many of us there already. No, thank you. Let's move on to other ideas. The fact that they had standards. They wanted to say, look, this is only about language. This debate isn't about language requirements at all. Number one, you can't get a work visa unless someone there is going to sponsor you. If you can't speak the language of the United States or of Germany, no one is going to sponsor you for an O visa. It doesn't make sense. There isn't really a problem of language integration. The Turks in Germany speak German. The Algerians in France speak French. Also because some of them are former colonial nations and things like that. But the point is they can integrate. Language isn't the issue. Information isn't the issue. No thank you. So why then are enclaves still enclaves? Why are there still parts of town which are Chinatown? That's scary. And why are some parts of town Senegal town? And that's scary. Possibly, and also because discrimination and discrimination laws are rampant. Often because immigrants can't get leases in better parts of town when white people discriminate against them. Immigrants can't necessarily always have vertical mobility in their jobs to somehow interact with more people of different races when discrimination is still rampant. No thank you. What you have done is to penalize individuals who are happy to be productive and are often happy to be productive for cheaper. Because of a discrimination which you think is invalid, but you simply aren't able to enforce because it's that insidious in your own society. Again, a problem-solution mismatch, consistent throughout government case, that they're never going to be able to reconcile because it's inherent in their model. No thank you. Let's talk about then this idea of the burqa and how people are, the burqa and the entire issue around that. Number one, no one is going to write on their form, will you force your adult daughter to wear a burqa? Yes. So we don't think any of their policies are going to work anyway. But let's say, so this means that if all of those little tests and all these little things, which are all memorized answers anyway, are going to be really silly, it's going to be subjectively and unfairly applied. Immigration officers at the border or in the embassies in your country are going to look at you and say, you said here in the form that you wouldn't force the woman to wear a burqa, but you look like a pretty old-fashioned dude to me with a long beard, and you look like you have an adult-age daughter. Do I think you will force her? What grounds do they have to go on if it's not discrimination? Because they're never going to trust people who will randomly tick off forms. Their policy doesn't solve for discrimination, which happens by consular officials, by officers, by people who will never be able to apply the law equally to all. Their policy, again, is going to hurt more than it helps. No thank you. Too arguments framed today, Mr. Speaker. First, I would discuss why there's a value in specifically targeting a melting pot, why diversity is not only not harmful, but beneficial to the progress of a state. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you more about culture. Is it worthy even to protect the idea that nodding is up and down for its own sake, when nodding left and right, well, even if it's confusing for me in debates, it's actually cute to see eventually. First then, this idea, no thank you, that there's a value in specifically targeting a melting pot, the idea of diversity. They started off very well when they talked about how in a globalizing world, it's unavoidable for us to have to accept the best and brightest, especially when the best and brightest might either one step home or go to a second or a third different developed country. That's why if the world is only going to grow more multicultural, not less, if you want to be able to continue to be competitive in the world market, there's a reason why you like hiring Indian doctors, because they're good doctors and you want the country to have lots of good doctors. There's a reason why you like Chinese programmers, because Chinese programming is amazing programming. There's a reason why you like Filipino restaurant workers, because service with a smile comes from the Philippines. We think all of these things provide them a comparative advantage, provide the country with the top level and top-notch things, are always going to be things that Germany, France, Hungary, Poland, the United States are always going to be something they're going to want. It's in itself, therefore, as an attitude, therefore, the ability to accept change, the ability to be socially sensitive, the ability to accept that other people are not as scary as you initially believed, is in itself a value the state should not only tolerate, but a value the state should promote. No thank you. But then we ask the question, how is tolerance and harmony made? How do you create a situation where people are become that way? That only happens through constant encounters with those people. Immigration is not a short-term solution, like in 5 years or in the 10 years